For 10 years, Daniel had lived with one unanswered question. Why did Sarah leave? Every night, when the house became silent, he remembered that rainy evening. Sarah had stood near the door with tears in her eyes, while their little daughter Emma slept upstairs. "You don't love us anymore," Sarah had whispered. Daniel was angry and hurt. "If that's what you believe, then go." Those words became the last thing Sarah heard from him. That night, she left with Emma. Daniel never called. At first, Daniel believed Sarah would eventually return. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Then years. Pride stopped him from searching. Pain stopped him from asking questions. He continued working and living alone in the same house. But he never stopped thinking about Emma. Every birthday, he bought her a small gift. Every Christmas, he imagined her sitting beside him. He placed all the gifts in a box and kept them hidden in his closet. He didn't know where to send them. Daniel never told anyone how lonely he was. Sometimes he cooked dinner for 3 people before realizing he was alone. Sometimes he heard a child's laughter outside and wondered how old. Emma must be now. At night, he would stand beside the window and whisper, "God, wherever Sarah and Emma are, please keep them safe." He never prayed for them to come back. Perhaps he was afraid that hope would hurt more than loneliness. Then, after 10 years, something unexpected happened. One rainy afternoon, Daniel heard the mail fall through the door. He almost ignored it, but one envelope caught his attention. His name was written on it in handwriting he hadn't seen for 10 years. Sarah. His hands began to shake. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at the envelope for several minutes before finally opening it. Inside was a single letter. Daniel began reading. "Daniel, if you are reading this, then God has finally allowed this letter to reach you." His heart began pounding. "I wrote this letter 10 years ago," Sarah continued. "I never stopped loving you. I left because I thought staying would destroy us both." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Sarah explained that on the night she left, she had wanted him to stop her. She wanted him to say that he was angry because he was afraid of losing them. But when Daniel told her to go, she believed he truly wanted her gone. Then came the truth Daniel had never known. "Emma was very sick when we left." Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. He continued reading. "The doctors discovered that Emma had a serious heart condition. I was terrified." Sarah had been afraid Daniel would blame her. She had sold her car, jewelry, and almost everything they owned to pay for Emma's treatment. They moved from one city to another. She had struggled to keep her daughter alive. Daniel lowered the letter. Tears rolled down his face. His little girl had been sick, and he had known nothing. Then he read the words that broke his heart. "Emma asked about you every day." Daniel covered his face. For 10 years, he had believed his daughter had forgotten him. But Sarah wrote that Emma had kept his photograph beside her bed. She always said, "Mom, Dad didn't leave us. He just doesn't know where we are." Daniel cried harder. He looked toward the closet, where all the unopened birthday gifts were hidden. For 10 years, he had been waiting for a daughter who had never stopped waiting for him. The final part of the letter changed everything. Emma is 20 years old now. She is healthy. She is studying to become a nurse. Because she remembers the doctors who saved her. Daniel Pierre's hands trembled. Then he read, "She has asked me many times if she can meet you." At the bottom of the letter was an address. Daniel didn't waste another minute. He grabbed his coat and rushed to his car. For the first time in 10 years, he allowed himself to hope. The journey took 6 hours. Rain covered the windshield as Daniel drove. His mind was filled with questions. What would Emma think of him? Would she hate him? Would Sarah regret writing the letter? Would they even recognize each other? When he finally reached the address, the sun was beginning to set. Daniel stood outside a small house. His heart was pounding. His hand moved toward the doorbell. Then he stopped. He almost turned around. Before he could leave, the door opened. Sarah stood there. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. 10 years of memories stood between them. Sarah looked older now. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah." She looked at him quietly. "I didn't know if you'd come." Daniel swallowed hard. "I almost didn't." "Why?" "Because I was afraid." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "So was I." Then a voice came from inside. "Mom?" Daniel froze. A young woman stepped into the hallway. She had Sarah's eyes, but Daniel immediately saw something familiar in her face, something that belonged to him. The young woman looked at him. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then her lips trembled. "Dad!" Daniel couldn't speak. 10 years of waiting had brought him to this one moment. Emma slowly walked toward him. Daniel wanted to hug her, but he was afraid. He didn't know if he still had the right. Then Emma stepped forward. Emma wrapped her arms around him. Daniel broke down. He held his daughter as tightly as he could. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Emma cried against his shoulder. "I waited for you." Daniel pulled away and looked into her eyes. "I wanted you every single day." Sarah stood nearby, crying silently. That evening, the 3 of them sat together around the kitchen table. There were painful questions. There were difficult answers. But for the first time in 10 years, they were talking instead of assuming. Later, Emma discovered the box Daniel had kept for 10 years. Inside were birthday gifts and Christmas presents, one for every year he had missed. Emma touched the gifts with trembling hands. "You kept these?" Daniel nodded. "I didn't know where to send them." Emma smiled through her tears. "You found me now." Daniel looked at Sarah. She was crying, but this time her tears were different. They weren't tears of goodbye. They were tears of a family finally finding its way home. That night, rain tapped softly against the windows. The same sound that had surrounded them 10 years earlier when Sarah walked away. But this time, nobody left. Daniel finally understood that the letter had not arrived too late. It had arrived when they were finally ready to hear the truth. The past could not be changed. They could never recover the birthdays, Christmas mornings, or years they had lost. But they had been given something precious, a second chance. Sometimes God doesn't erase the past. Sometimes He simply opens a door when the right moment finally comes. Daniel looked at Sarah and Emma and smiled through his tears. For 10 years, he had believed their story was over. Now he knew the truth. The letter had arrived 10 years too late, but right on time.